The city never slept. Neon lights flickered over rain-slicked streets, reflecting the pulse of ambition, fear, and power. In the heart of New Liberty City, the Marzano crime family ruled with an iron fist, their influence stretching from the underground casinos of the East Side to the shipping docks along the Hudson. Vincenzo Marzano, known to many as the Don, was more than a criminal. He was a legend. Tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to see through men's souls, he commanded loyalty through a blend of fear and respect. His family had built an empire from nothing, and every brick of it was soaked in blood, sweat, and secrets. It all began decades ago, in a small apartment above a laundromat in Little Italy. Vincenzo's father, Carlo Marzano, was a streetwise operator, a man who knew that in the underworld, survival meant taking what others were too timid to claim. Carlo's motto was simple: power is the currency of respect. Young Vincenzo learned early. At 10, he was running messages between his father's associates. At 15, he was managing small-scale protection schemes for neighborhood businesses. By 20, he had outgrown his father's shadow, not by rebelling, but by outthinking every rival. He understood the rules of the game. Loyalty was earned, betrayal was punished, and silence was sacred. The 1980s were a turning point. The city was booming, corruption was rampant, and the law was blind if the price was right. The Marzano family expanded rapidly, taking over gambling rings, illegal trade routes, and eventually the nightclubs that became the city's heartbeat. Vincenzo's name began appearing in whispers, first among street crews, then in the tabloids, and finally in the reports of federal agents who were desperate to take him down. But with power came enemies. Other families watched the Marzanos with envy and suspicion. The Russo family, longtime rivals, plotted in shadows. Alliances were fragile, and every handshake could mask a gun beneath the table. Vincenzo, however, thrived on strategy. He was not the kind of man who confronted threats with brute force first. He dissected them, turning enemies into assets whenever possible, and removing those who resisted with surgical precision. It was during the infamous Liberty Night massacre that Vincenzo's ruthlessness became legend. A routine negotiation with the Russo family spiraled into chaos when an unexpected betrayal led to a shootout in the abandoned warehouse district. By dawn, 3 rival lieutenants were dead, 2 police officers were injured, and Vincenzo emerged unscathed, standing amidst the smoke and debris, a silhouette against the city skyline. That night, his reputation was cemented, not just as a Don, but as a ghost who could strike without warning. Yet, power always comes at a cost. Vincenzo's younger brother, Marco, once his closest ally, began to question the morality of their empire. Marco had fallen in love with Elena, a schoolteacher who despised the criminal world. She became the voice of conscience Vincenzo never sought, and Marco's loyalty began to waver. Conflicts between the brothers simmered quietly, like magma beneath a seemingly calm surface. By the 1990s, the Marzano Empire was untouchable. Casinos flourished, construction contracts were subtly manipulated, and politicians paid homage in whispers. But the feds were relentless. Agent Thomas Riker, a man obsessed with taking down Vincenzo, infiltrated the family's operations, planting surveillance and gathering evidence. Every meeting, every phone call, every transaction became a thread in the tapestry of a coming storm. Then came the betrayal of Venice, a business trip that should have been routine. Vincenzo traveled to Venice, Italy, under the guise of expanding his European ventures. There, a close lieutenant, Salvatore Sal De Luca, turned on him, hoping to curry favor with a rival Italian syndicate. Vincenzo narrowly escaped an ambush, returning to New Liberty with a resolve sharper than ever. The city sensed a shift. The Don was no longer just a ruler. He was a man seeking vengeance. The story of the Marzano family is not just one of crime. It's a story of loyalty, ambition, love, and betrayal. Vincenzo's rise was meteoric, but the threads of his empire were fraying. Friends became informants, allies became threats, and the city that once bowed to him now whispered his name in fear and awe. In the climactic showdown set in the shadow of the old docks where Carlo had first begun his empire, Vincenzo faced enemies old and new, explosions of gunfire, the roar of engines, and the cries of betrayal marked the fall of the empire. By the end, only Vincenzo and Marco remained. Brothers, yet divided by blood, love, and the inevitability of their world. The city moved on as cities do. Skyscrapers rose, businesses changed hands, and the neon lights continued to flicker over rain-slicked streets. But the legend of Vincenzo Marzano, the last Don, remained, a story whispered in alleyways, told in hushed tones in smoky bars, and remembered as a testament to the price of power, the fragility of loyalty, and the haunting allure of the underworld. Yet, even as the city moved forward, the shadows of the past refused to fade completely. There were whispers of unseen hands guiding events from the dark corners of New Liberty, of deals struck in secret and debts long overdue. Vincenzo's name had become a kind of cautionary talisman, a reminder that power, no matter how absolute, was never truly safe from the consequences it sowed. Marco, now carrying the weight of both grief and survival, found himself wandering through the streets his family had once ruled. Each alley, each abandoned warehouse, spoke to him in echoes of laughter, betrayal, and blood. He often paused outside the old nightclub that had been the jewel of the Marzano Empire, running his hand along its graffiti-scarred wall, remembering the nights of celebration, the strategic meetings, the hushed threats exchanged in the smoky haze of dimly lit rooms. It was here, amidst the detritus of a vanished empire, that Marco began to sense a new rhythm in the city, one that was quieter, more cautious, yet pregnant with possibility. Meanwhile, the law enforcement agencies that had once chased Vincenzo were left chasing shadows. Agent Thomas Riker had retired, but his obsession had left a lasting mark on the police force. Young detectives still studied Vincenzo's rise and fall as if he were a case study in human cunning, ambition, and the perilous seduction of absolute control. Some admired him secretly, others despised him openly. But all agreed on one thing. The Marzano family, in all its ruthlessness and brilliance, had changed the very nature of crime in New Liberty forever. And somewhere in the corners where the neon lights barely reached, whispers persisted that Vincenzo was not gone entirely. Stories emerged of a man in an unassuming cafe in a distant city, always dressed sharply, always watching, always calculating. Perhaps he had retreated to lick his wounds and rebuild elsewhere, or perhaps these tales were merely the fantasies of those too eager to believe in a ghost. But for those who had lived through the reign of the Marzanos, the possibility was enough to keep them awake at night, hearts racing with fear and fascination. The city, relentless in its transformation, seemed oblivious to the invisible currents beneath its streets. Skyscrapers rose higher, technology advanced, new gangs tried and failed to claim the shadows once dominated by the Marzanos. Yet the lessons of the past lingered. Loyalty could be bought, fear could be wielded, and power, once seized, demanded vigilance. Marco, now a reluctant guardian of a memory too potent to erase, understood that his family's story was far from over. In the world of the underworld, legends never truly die. They wait, And so, as the rain pattered against the windows of high-rise apartments and taxi lights painted fleeting lines across glistening streets, the spirit of Vincenzo Marzano, the last Don, remained alive in every whispered secret, every cautious glance, and every decision made in the murky gray between law and crime. The city moved on, but somewhere, the ghost of the Marzano Empire watched, patient, eternal, and unyielding.
If you made it to the end, thank you. Please leave a like and subscribe. It helps me create more stories like this one, because some secrets are still waiting to be heard.
Long before the world called him El Patron, Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was just a restless boy in the hills of Envigado. He grew up barefoot, chasing clouds of dust down broken roads, surrounded by poverty that taught him hunger, not only of the stomach, but of the soul. His mother, Hermilda, was a strict schoolteacher who believed in education. His father, Abel, was a quiet farmer who believed in the land. But Pablo believed in something else: destiny. Even as a child, he refused to accept his place. When other kids dreamed of food or shoes, Pablo dreamed of power. He sold stolen exam papers, faked diplomas, ran small hustles in the markets. By 16, he was already dealing in stolen cars and contraband cigarettes. The boy who once counted coins in his pocket now counted the rules he would one day break. He told his cousin one evening, "I won't die poor. I'll die famous." And when cocaine began flowing north in the late 1970s, the world unknowingly made room for his ambition. Part 2. White Gold. Cocaine changed everything. To the elite of Miami and New York, it was luxury, a whisper of euphoria. To Escobar, it was an empire waiting to be built. With ruthless precision, he formed the Medellín cartel, a network of pilots, chemists, smugglers, and killers. Deep in the Colombian jungle, laboratories churned out the white powder day and night. Private planes took off under the moonlight, their bellies full of white gold. Each flight meant millions, each shipment meant blood. Within years, Escobar's reach extended beyond Colombia's borders to Panama, the Caribbean, the United States. He built airstrips in the forest, submarines in rivers, and secret routes across oceans. By the mid-1980s, 4 out of every 5 lines of cocaine in America came from him. Money piled up faster than he could count it, literally. The cartel learned so much that Escobar spent $2,500 a month just on rubber bands to wrap his cash. He buried barrels of dollars in the earth, knowing he'd never spend it all. But Pablo wasn't chasing wealth anymore. He was chasing history. Part 3. The King of Medellín. By the time his fortune reached billions, Escobar had become a paradox, both hero and villain. In the slums of Medellín, he built homes, schools, hospitals, soccer fields. To the poor, he was a savior. Children ran to his car shouting, "Don Pablo," and he smiled, tossing bills like blessings. They called him the Robin Hood of Colombia. But behind that smile was something darker. Every brick he laid was paid for in blood. Every handshake hid a threat. Escobar's kindness was real, but it was also a weapon, a way to buy loyalty in a world where fear ruled. His influence stretched into politics. He bribed officials, funded campaigns, and in 1982, even won a seat in the Colombian Congress. For a brief moment, he stood among the country's elite, a drug trafficker disguised as a statesman. But power demands enemies, and Escobar's rise had already written the script for his fall. Part 4. Narco Wars. When the Colombian government finally recognized what he truly was, Escobar responded with war. Rivals like the Cali cartel emerged, but his deadliest enemy became the state itself. Judges were murdered, police chiefs assassinated, car bombs ripped through Bogotá and Medellín. The phrase, plata o plomo, silver or lead, became his law. Take the bribe or take a bullet. Escobar turned fear into strategy. He waged psychological war on an entire nation, ordering attacks that left cities trembling. In 1989, he orchestrated the bombing of Avianca Flight 203, killing over 100 people in an attempt to assassinate a political candidate. It was the moment Colombia crossed the line from crime to terrorism. Even his allies began to doubt him, whispering that El Patron had lost control. But Escobar didn't hear the whispers, or refused to. To him, every death was a message, every explosion a signature. He believed he was untouchable. History would soon correct him. Part 5. The Prison of Gold. When the blood became too heavy to ignore, Escobar struck an unthinkable deal with the government. He would surrender, but as always, on his terms. He built La Catedral, a prison in name only, perched on a green hillside overlooking Medellín. It had a soccer field, a bar, waterfalls, a gym, and a panoramic view of the city he ruled. He played cards with his guards, drank whiskey with friends, and continued running his empire from within its walls. The illusion of peace didn't last. When the government attempted to transfer him to a real prison, Pablo escaped through a hole in the wall, barefoot, laughing, disappearing into the mist. The man who built his own prison had turned it into a fortress. Now he became Colombia's most hunted ghost. Part 6. The Hunt. The manhunt that followed was legendary. The Colombian government, the DEA, and a vigilante group called Los Pepes joined forces to end Escobar's reign. Each day, the circle around him tightened. Each night, he moved from one safe house to another, trusting fewer and fewer people. The empire he'd built through terror was now crumbling in silence. He listened to police radios, ate simple meals, and phoned his family in secret. To his mother, he was still her little boy. To his enemies, he was the devil in hiding. But time had done what bullets could not. It broke him. His power was gone, his allies scattered, his wealth useless. All he had left was pride. "They can kill me," he once said, "but they can't kill my legend." He was right, but not in the way he hoped. Part 7. The End of the King. December 2nd, 1993. A quiet afternoon in Medellín. Escobar had just called his son, a short, tender conversation, his last. Minutes later, his hideout was surrounded. Police and soldiers flooded the neighborhood. Pablo ran to the rooftop, firing wildly. For a moment, it felt like one of his old shootouts, the invincible patron against the world. But the years had slowed him. A bullet struck him behind the ear. Some say it came from a police rifle. Others say it was his own, a final act of control. His body lay sprawled on the red tiles, face pressed to the sunlit roof. The man who once ruled continents had fallen no further than 2 stories high. Below, children cheered, not in celebration, but in disbelief. The king was dead, and yet, in the barrios of Medellín, his ghost lingers. His story remains a riddle. Was he a monster born of poverty, or a man who believed he could rewrite the rules of the world? Perhaps both. Because even in death, Pablo Escobar got what he always wanted: immortality.
If you made it to the end, thank you. Please leave a like and subscribe. It helps me create more stories like this one, because some secrets are still waiting to be heard.